Awesome. Thanks, Kunal. Hi, everyone. My name is Kunal Mehta, and I am a part of the Taskar Center team. Uh, Welcome, everyone, to the Spring Advisory Board meeting of the Sidewalks Inventory and Accessibility Mapping Project. Um, we'll give everyone a moment to settle down, but we'd love to know you. So if you could maybe drop drop in the chat your name, your organization if you represent one, and your role. And if I know chat can be inaccessible at times, so if someone wants to unmute and just say it out, that works too. So yeah, we'll give everyone a minute to do this.
Hi, my name's Doreen Cornwell, and one of my hats is Washington Council, the Blind Advocacy Committee. But I've been involved with lots of different parts of this process and eager to see what moves forward.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Awesome. While everyone sends in their intros, we could maybe quickly go over the agenda. So Washington has completed statewide collection of draft one of the OS Connect data. What does this mean? It means using the statewide imagery, aerial imagery of 2023, sidewalks and crossings have been uniformly identified using the uh, sorry, my screen reader and my chat. Okay, what I was saying was what the collection really means is uh, s- we have sidewalks and crossings data uniformly identified for the state, and this includes jurisdictional boundaries and uh, unincorporated areas of counties that have been designated as census tract and population centers by the Washington State Department of Transportation. Now we are also preparing to move into phase two starting June 2026. That includes stewardship, use of the data, um, sustained coordination, and other aspects related. This meeting will review what is being built, um, the jurisdictional engagement we've been having, and seek your advice on the next phase of the stewardship. In terms of the agenda today, we kind of have a packed agenda where we'll start with talking about what we have now as a part of the draft one data. We then go into an update and where we'll share an update on the jurisdictional engagement where we've reached out to all jurisdictions in the state and the responses we've had, the learnings that we've had, and related aspects. We then go into a discussion with the group here where we want to speak about or we want to learn about the best way to engage jurisdictions, the way to make it easy sustainable and uh, easy for them to and incentivize them to kind of participate in the process. We then go into speaking a little bit about the next phase, where we talk about possibilities as to uh, uh, what could be what could happen with the QA/QC, the right evaluation pathways, the local updates of the data by jurisdiction, and refreshed imagery. Um, we then go into the WayKeeper and stewardship process, and um, see how that kind of uh, goes into the next phase and seek your advice. And finally, we close with the priorities for the next few months. And we would hopefully have some time for questions and discussion as well at the end. So now I want to hand it over to Anat to take us through the next section. And I did want to mention, please share any questions on chat or raise your hand, and we can get you up to speak. So over to you, Anat.
Thank you so much, Kunal. Thank you all for joining us. There's still some folks who are joining through. If you don't mind, please share your name, your organizational affiliation, and role. We are very excited that you've joined us today. We're marking a transition point in June for OS Connect. The first phase of this was about building something that Washington or no other state has built before, which was a statewide standardized connected inventory of pedestrian infrastructure and accessibility relevant data. That includes, as shown on this slide, sidewalks, crossings, curb nodes, and the pedestrian network connectivity that determines whether people can actually get from one place to another. But the larger point of today's meeting is that the state did not simply fund a one-time inventory. It hopefully funded the foundation for public infrastructure, which means data, tools, updating workflows, and other workflows that can support safer, more accessible, more equitable travel across Washington. So this briefing is about that transition from building the data to keeping it useful. Essentially, we are telling you about how we did the collection, but we need to move this towards stewardship, maintenance, and continuity. So why does this data set exist? The legislative proviso called for the creation of a public data set and the, quote, tools to publish it. And there are two images on the right of the slide. One is a statewide view, which is the Washington state as a whole, with the locations in green where pedestrian data was distributed and collected. The other is the network view, which I'll get to in a minute, which is a detailed pedestrian environment with all of the elements that were collected for this collection. It is accessible to you right now via a QR code that's shown on the screen. That will take you to the OS Connect viewer, and we will share this link in the chat. So what we're trying to convey today is there is OS Connect, which is the collection of features of all the sidewalks, crossings, and curb node elements in the census designated places and population centers as designated by Washington State DOT. But we wanted to demonstrate that we interpreted the proviso not just about producing a static map. We're interested in a reusable public asset. And that means that the next phase question is not only whether we finished it, but how this asset continues to serve Washingtonians after the initial collection phase. So what do we have now? The scale here is substantial, so I wanted to note it. We have more than 537,000 sidewalks collected, more than 589,000 crossings, 822,000 curb nodes, and more than 12 5,000 square kilometers of coverage in the 788 data sets that were collected. And so the map on the lower left shows the statewide footprint. The green areas, again, show where OS Connect data is present. But the more important point is not just the coverage, it's the standardization and the connectivity, which I'll get to in a minute. Before OS Connect, the pedestrian data across the state was fragmented. Some jurisdictions have GIS-related data, others had partial data, or some had no sidewalk inventory at all. And where the data existed, it was often not in the same schema or not connected or not immediately usable across different jurisdictional boundaries. And so OS Connect has changed that by creating a common structure. It is one standard across the jurisdictions. The standard is called Open Sidewalks. It includes all jurisdictions, unincorporated areas, and census-designated places, and it is a connected graph rather than local files or a patchwork of elements. So because I'm highlighting connectivity, why does connectivity matter? We're saying that OS Connect is more than a map because the map can show sidewalks exist, but for many travelers, especially travelers who experience disability, the decisive question is whether those sidewalks connect them to a usable route. And so the illustration on the slide on the right shows a pedestrian environment that is represented as a network. There are sidewalk links, crossings, curb ramps, and points where the barriers or attributes affect whether a person can continue to traverse in those locations. And the visual is trying to show that pedestrian access is not just about individual features, it's about how those features connect. So a missing sidewalk link can interrupt someone's access, and the dataset is now able to show that. A disconnected path can also make a destination theoretically nearby, but practically unreachable. And so those are the things we can diagnose now with this data set. And that's why I highlight the attribute connectivity as a major point of this asset. So the open sidewalk schema gives us a way to represent that connectivity in the pedestrian environment in a consistent form across the whole state. It's applied statewide, so Washington can begin to ask network level questions like where can people actually go and reach? Where does the network break? Which destinations are reachable for which types of travelers? Because we can simulate the activity of different types of constrained mobility. So what did we gain in this process? Basically, now I'm highlighting what every jurisdiction has at the end of phase 2. It's basically summarizing what Washington can now know. First, we now know where the pedestrian network exists and where it breaks. This is foundational, like I said, but it also lets people on the street see gaps, discontinuities, and places where the routes fail. Access Map is an open web application which provides a pedestrian navigation tool. So every Washingtonian can now open Access Map and find out where they can navigate to by foot or by rolling. They can give very specific customizations about their ability either to go up certain types of inclines, using stairs or climbing up curbs, and they'll know where the network will connect them given their specific abilities. The second part that every Washingtonian now can know is which access points of interest, essential services, schools, transit stops, etc., are reachable for different types of users. So via both Access Map and Walkshed, you're able to simulate the traversal of different types of travelers based on those same customizations for different types of travel, as we mentioned. And they can understand what the 10, 5, 15-minute roll walk route might be for a safe route for different types of travelers. And this is represented in the Walkshed tool. Again, available for all jurisdictions and data sets in the OS Connect data. Third, we can now identify where to focus safety, focus ADA improvements, as well as local validation. The data doesn't replace local judgment, and that's what we will talk about regarding stewardship. It helps local and state planners and partners know where to look, where to verify, and where investments might have the greatest effect. And our QC reports can give you access directly to the understanding and viewing the data, and also knowing where potential improvements might come up. So in essence, this slide tries to repeat the core scale of the data set and notes that all of these data sets provide not just pieces of information, but a way to operate these pedestrian network data. So now we move into what did we do after the data collection and how are we preparing for stewardship? Our main tenet is that a clear ecosystem is needed of workflows to support people who are intending to steward and maintain this data. So a living data set will require more than just a data collection and, as the proviso stated, the tools to publish it. We are trying to require a repeated cycle where collection, validation, and publishing is not just the endpoint, but it promotes future stewardship and update on an ongoing basis. So what this slide shows is a stewardship loop. We started at the top, and this is basically what we have completed. We did an AI collection with an integrated human-coupled vetting, and this is important because every piece of sidewalk, crossing, curb node data in this data set was vetted by hand, compared against the 2023 Washington State Imagery Consortium imagery from Hexagon. If a new imagery set was available to us, we would be able to provide continuous inventory. While we're waiting for this newer imagery, we're enabling maintenance and upkeep feedback loops through the workflows that we've developed, so that we can then allow field staff to review or update information, as well as desktop-based review and updates, as well as community engagement updates through mobile apps and the Access Map web application. So what we're trying to demonstrate in this visual is that there are multiple different workflows enabled in the tooling to provide different access points for different types of stewards. And we're trying to be flexible with respect to the type of skill sets that they provide and have, as well as the capacity that they might have for doing these kinds of structured upkeep and maintenance. So the point is that engagement with communities, with jurisdictions, and contractors cannot be fully automated or fully solved without stewardship and people engaging. And so the asset only remains useful if Washington has a clear ecosystem for maintaining it, but also a plan. So the next phase is all about operationalizing this work. How do updates come in? Who validates them? How do local agencies participate? How does lived experience become structured data? How do we make sure that the public-facing tools remain aligned with the updated infrastructure? So we have spent the last year pursuing different kinds of pilots so that we have a clearer picture of what types of needs are out there. We built up workflows to enable those pilots. And I will tell you about these type pilots just after describing some of these workflows, so it's a little bit more clear. But I do want to pause right now if there are any questions about what we've created, because now I'm about to go into the next session, the next section, which is about how workflows enable stewardship. Okay. All right, so operation and action. Here I went too quick. So what we're trying to explain here is that we created workflows to allow both people with lived experience as well as contractor closeouts, and how they can both become operational data. And the photo on the right shows a person navigating near a construction area. with a wheelchair. That image is a reminder about both pedestrian accessibility conditions, that they change constantly, as well as the fact that when a project is completed and a barrier is fixed, that improvement may never make it back into the public data. And those are the two things that we're trying to address. So the workflow at the bottom shows the loop that we've created with two different types of contribution paths. The first is a report of a barrier or a recent fix. Those can be made through a mobile app. Once that contribution is made, the app attaches that information to a specific route, place, or facility context directly in OS Connect. So this is a really important difference from other types of find it, fix it apps or other kinds of apps for public comment, because the report is made, and typically in those other apps, there is a human in the loop that's needed to tie the comment, the request, or the compliance report to the GIS dataset. And that step creates friction and institutional hurdles that are also error prone. And the next step for us is to allow for this mobile app to attach itself directly. The comment, the report, the ADA compliance assessment, all of those are directly attached to an entity in the OS Connect dataset directly. And so that means that at the next level, rather than actually walking over the data into the dataset, the jurisdiction or agency that is operationally responsible for this area can update the information and just validate and verify that they agree with it so that it can be incorporated in planning and other updates in step number 4. So this is important because public feedback by itself is not enough, as well as contractor closeouts are not enough. If the feedback comes in PDFs, in CAD drawings, or unstructured notes, those can be really hard for staff to interpret, to validate, or reuse. And the goal here is to make these observations in a structured and geolocated way from the very beginning. That way, information from community, residents, advocates, staff, and contractors can all be operationally incorporated and absorbed from the field. So given this information, we'll now describe some of the stewardship pilots that we have done in the last year to basically suss out what are some pathways for us to engage with different actors to sustain the OS Connect dataset. So what has been I'll start from community. I'll move to industry, and then we'll talk about jurisdictional engagement because that is really the core of where we need to put our energy. But I wanted to describe some of what we've done with community and industry first. So this slide shows examples of community engagement events that were led by Non-Drivers Alliance, and TCAT partnered with the Non-Drivers Alliance to provide the workflows that I just talked about to enable public comment by community. And you see here 5 different communities where this workflow was engaged. I talked about enabling public comment by the community. So participants did walkabouts in each of these communities. There was one additional event in Bellingham in addition to what's shown here. The communities got to experience pedestrian hostile environments and other kinds of pedestrian environments and evaluated first if the data matched the truth on the ground. They also got to test the commenting workflow that I just talked about by providing contributions about their own lived experience in those settings. So the events that we're showing here are, well, not shown is Bellingham and Whatcom. We have Vancouver and Clark County, Spanaway and Pierce County, Sedro-Woolley and Skagit County, South Everett and Snohomish County, and Dayton and Columbia County. We have logged the contribution and participant counts along with the partner organizations that showed up to these events. And again, Non-Drivers Alliance was the lead on these events. The numbers do matter because in just one of these workflows, this is the mobile app, there were 58 overall app participants that chose to provide the comments. They had choice, of course, to not participate. Overall, 243 public comments were collected. They pertain to 188 sidewalks and crossings and 55 curb points. And the comments covered more than 7,000 meters of sidewalk and 1,600 meters of crossings that received active review comments. None of the comments were about incorrect placement of the data. That's key. The key here is that with these workflows, communities can support stewardship and maintenance only if the systems exist to absorb that kind of feedback. We have heard from jurisdictions that operationalizing this information is difficult, and we have community members tell us where these barriers are, but we want to be able to identify into the future routes that fail, crossings that feel unsafe, places where the map doesn't match the reality. And so to have that, we have to enable these types of workflows. The next stage was also to work with industry partners in order to support maintenance without duplicating systems. So the key here is that we have a consistent data set with a single endpoint to facilitate their use of statewide traveler-facing public asset. And what we were trying to test with these pilots is the consistent use of this data through that single endpoint. Having that single endpoint means that a single place where the app provider can go to use the full statewide data, which makes it easier for different companies and public interest technology partners to build traveler-facing tools from this public asset, the OS Connect. And the table that we're showing here is about several current partners and conversations that we're having regarding how different partners can use the data with that single endpoint in place. The strategic point is that industry, community, and jurisdictional use should not create separate and competing data sets. It should reinforce that idea of having a single public asset where someone can go and find it. Very similar idea to how GTFS is governed. So if companies, accessibility tools, and public agencies all work from a consistent public data, then the improvements, the corrections can all flow back into a shared infrastructure rather than fragmenting it into individual proprietary silos. And that's what the demonstration is about. So obviously I left the most important part for last. Clear ecosystem is needed to support jurisdictional stewardship and maintenance. These are the partners that we have put the most energy into because these are the parties that operate these environments. So we reached out to all Washington jurisdictions and counties through 430 public contacts. The invitation was essentially practical. It informed them that OS Connect was live for their jurisdiction. It pointed them directly to the QA/QC reports that they can use immediately to learn about connectivity and prioritization in their jurisdiction. It asks them to join the OS Connect data with any local knowledge that they have, local data and imagery, and we let them know that they can keep the data set live through updates and validation, and 3 different types of workflows they can use in order to do that. We also offered them support in terms of office hours and through data analytic hours to use that for pilots to do concrete workflows like ADA compliance, Vision Zero, and public work. So in addition to that, we offered monetary grants that we call SCLEOs to support the work to do with these pilots. And the response so far shows promise and the scale of the work that we have ahead of us. 26 out of 430 contacted or did respond. We have 3 active pilots, with one of them receiving grant funding. And we also saw a large number of non-responses. So that's 374 did not respond. This, I don't believe, should be interpreted simply as lack of interest. We understand that jurisdictions vary in terms of staffing, in GIS capacity, in terms of planning maturity, public work workflows, and also available time. So some may not yet understand what OS Connect is, or may not know what they would do with it, or some might not have the staff assigned to pedestrian data. Also, clearer use cases might be needed before they engage. So, for example, we also reached out in terms of for SS4A applications to support them with that grant funding opportunity. So we've created multiple ways for jurisdictions to provide local input and integrate with local processes. But for phase two, the goal is not just to contact them, it's obviously to lower friction of participation and make it clear how jurisdictions can start from wherever they are. So this is where we are going to ask for your support in discussing these challenges. And I want to give some examples of how jurisdictions have been engaged and some of these use cases, so you might be able to think through how to basically jujitsu through the stewardship question. So how jurisdictions engage right now, there are three engagement pathways that we've discussed with them. The first pathway is to flag an issue. We provided you with the OS Connect viewer. They can go to the viewer to their particular jurisdiction, use the viewer to report a mismatch by right-clicking on the location of a mismatch between their local knowledge and what's there. They can flag a barrier or an outdated condition, and that's the lowest friction entry point. It's appropriate for agencies that want to begin by reviewing what's visible in the data and also identify obvious corrections. The second pathway is submitting a refresh. This is a model where a jurisdiction downloads the data, edits it in their own GIS infrastructure. They can do merges or update the data locally to them and then send back an updated release. This is obviously appropriate for jurisdictions that already have GIS capacity as well as local data workflows. The third pathway is a guided maintenance. Here, a jurisdiction works with the provided toolset, which includes a GIS desktop that we provide them with, as well as a mobile app access. The Taskar Center provides support through weekly office hours. We have the QA/QC reports to again update their understanding of where connectivity breaks, where some ADA compliance issues may arise, where some data issues may arise, and they want to prioritize checking there. And I will show the Goldendale example in just a minute about how they've used this mechanism as part of a deeper planning or ADA workflow. I heard something. Do I need to respond to something? Okay. So basically, a key design principle for stewardship for us is that a statewide system has to support all the different jurisdictions, large cities, small towns, counties, transit agencies, rural communities, and places with limited staff capacity. And the pathway with three different pathways basically has to be flexible enough to let different partners begin with whatever they actually already do. So what did the city of Goldendale do? I want to show an ADA compliance use case. Goldendale and Gorge Transit show how local collection can support ADA transition planning. The visual sequence here shows the workflow essentially. First, they use the base OS Connect layer, and local staff and the RTO project manager collected additional information using the mobile app. So the mobile app was used, but they flexibly designed what was being collected in the mobile app to target very specifically exactly the ADA compliance data that they wanted and had bandwidth to collect. And then the lower images show the outputs that have the report tables as well as the mapped pedestrian network and the identification of ADA barriers in that network post their collection. So essentially the highlight is that the result is a richer data set. They took the baseline OS Connect and added onto it And the process was completely locally governed and produced a data asset for ADA transition planning where they didn't have a transition plan or a collection prior to that. So overall, the agency collected over 2,100 forms that provided compliance-specific information on sidewalk conditions, curb conditions, and crossings. This work was done by 2 persons on foot reviewers and 1 site manager, and we're now working with them to complete this ADA compliance report. And the idea is this is not just a one-time inventory exercise, this is repeatable, and they're able to continue and develop this on an ongoing practice. I will maybe allow folks to well, I'll talk very quickly about emergency management use case. This slide is about how to use the data in emergency resilience. In 2025, as we all know, we experienced flooding and levee or bridge failures, isolated different communities like Duval and Carnation. And the important lesson was that isolation and not congestion was the dominant failure mode in these areas. The map on the right shows Duval and Carnation as network diagrams, and they illustrate how closures and different types of failures created accessibility islands, meaning that parts of the community became disconnected from the rest of the accessible network. And this matters because pedestrian accessibility data is not just about day-to-day travel. So we used OS Connect in this way to help agencies understand what happens when different parts of the network fail, which neighborhoods can get cut off, what services might become unreachable. And this is a good example of why OS Connect is more than inventory because it is connected. It can support the scenario analysis. And also because it's statewide, it can build a more resilient and consistent approach across the state to look at resilience as well as equity across communities. And the last use case I'll go through is safe routes to schools. The use case shows how OS Connect can support not just safe routes to schools, but also analysis that look and compare walksheds for different types of travelers trying to access different essential services. So we have a workflow where multiple points of interest can be analyzed at the whole city scale. So you just put in a single GeoJSON file with all the locations of interest. These could be all the schools, all the bus stops in a particular jurisdiction or county. And the key point is that one network can support in understanding how multiple travelers act around these networks. So this is important because essential services might appear walkable in a conventional analysis or a road-based analysis, but if the accessible route is more limited for a cane user, for a blind traveler, or somebody avoiding steep slopes, then the standard walking analysis would be incomplete, but this current workflow allows them to compare not just what are the different walksheds for different essential services, but what are comparative barriers for different types of travelers in the vicinity, the walksheds of those essential services. Okay, so now I have finished kind of surveying what we have collected, what workflows we have enabled for different jurisdictions, including having the customizable pedestrian access tool in Access Map, the planner-facing tools to enable understanding where pedestrians might reach and how to be able to model the behavior of different travelers in those environments. And lastly, the ability to provide scenario planning and prioritization in those areas. And I also painted the scenario of who we have reached out to and what kind of traction we built with those engagements. What I am trying to assess for the next phase, or what we need your your engagement on, is how can we best jointly work with you, and what do you need to know in order to shape conditions for OS Connect sustainability? So basically, we've demonstrated in the previous slides that the next phase is crucially dependent on stakeholder engagement. And we want advisory board contributions in the next 2 months. I'm not asking you to answer this question immediately, on a number of different topics. What I'm trying to assess today is whether you see any additional contributions and goals that we should target by the advisory board, and also what information could we provide you and the public via briefs and consultations and case studies that might give you what you need to answer some of these questions. And so I think the important part is to remember that the overarching goal is how to promote deeper stakeholder engagement in phase 2 so that we can sustain the OS Connect data set long term. And we're asking how we can use your help in the next phase to shape the conditions under which the data set basically survives and becomes useful. And I'll actually start from the bottom of this list, because we want continuity narrative that is operationally realistic and clear. And it's not really about asking for an abstract new initiative. It's about preserving and activating a statewide asset that Washington has already built. And as each of you is aligned with a community or organization that's linked to pedestrian environments, what do you see as a narrative that as a team, we and the advisory board can message to increase operational engagement? So I will open this up for a conversation. And I will say that we have a strategic advisor in Paolo who will come on next to tell you about some of the ideations that we have had, but I want your unbiased opinion before we open that conversation up. I see some comments in the chat. I see questions about how agencies can join the pilot with interest. So we do have a landing page tool, but we can talk about that in just a minute. We can definitely clarify how agencies can join the pilots. Anyone else? Okay. Well, then I will pass the baton over to Paolo, who is our strategic advisor, about how we can create continuity into the next phase. And we will describe some of the ideas around what we will be doing. Paolo, take it away.
Thank you. Can you confirm that you can hear me?
We can absolutely hear you. Thank you.
All right. Hey, everybody. My name is Paulo Nunes-Bueno, and I'm really excited to be part of the TCAT team working on this. A while ago, I had the real privilege of working with Front and Center to develop a transportation bill of rights process that was kind of the precursor to getting this funding from the state, but it was also sort of this, you know, the fruition, the sort of result of a bunch of grassroots work that we had done in partnership with Disability Rights Washington, in partnership with TCC, in partnership with the amazing advocates that we have around the state. And in that work, we really thought about how does change happen, right? And we sort of boiled it down to this sort of recipe of, can you go back to the previous slide, please? I'll say next slide. And in that, you know, we said it can be boiled down into establish rights, show where rights are being violated, and then fight for justice, and then rinse and repeat. And the really powerful thing about this work is that it sheds such a bright light on where rights are being violated, where you can't get to your bus stop, where you because the network is missing, the network is incomplete, or the data is not there, so that people can know that they can do this particular trip, then all of the goodness that we have in society, the opportunities, the food, the fun, the the getting together with friends, the education is inaccessible. And so the things that we've built here are really powerful, but when we're being honest with ourselves, they are hard to explain. It's hard to find and it's hard to use. And what we're showing here is that we have many different identities and names and at least 4 URLs, and not mentioned, how can we reduce the friction for people using this to shine that light of where rights are being violated, to shine that light on how improvements can be made. How can we make this easier to use? There's another thing that's really important that as I'm a semi-outsider to this group, sort of giving sort of unvarnished feedback. And one of the things that I see is this is our identity so far is very husky tinted, right? And as anybody who has grown up east of the mountains or has spent any time east of the mountains in Washington State, showing up in purple and gold says something specific about who you're speaking from or who you're speaking to. And so I think what we need to do is to find an identity from which we're speaking that is inclusive of Washingtonians as a whole. And so next slide. So the thing that we are playing with is to call this Washington WayKeeper. And that it is, when we explain it to people, that we say this is open data for accessible streets and for connected communities. And it's a one-stop shop for both travelers who want to find a safe way to get to the good things that their communities have, and for planners and for cities, and really importantly, for advocates. So next slide. So what is the brand promise? What are we promising when we say Washington WayKeeper? And this is really important, and it's groundbreaking. When we say every single person in Washington State now has access to an app that can tell you very specifically, with good data, on where you can use your wheelchair, where you can use an assistive device that enunciates directions for people with blind or low vision. At the same time, every city, every county, every agency in Washington State now has access to this complete pedestrian network that includes all of the things that Anat was talking about in terms of sidewalks, curbs, ramps, and crossings, and the tools to visualize and prioritize those improvements, and a platform to manage the updates to that data. So and neighborhood groups and advocates, and interestingly, construction crews have a way in which they can flag the mismatches between the data and the real world. They can create these walk and roll quests together, like Anna, for example, from Non-Drivers Alliance has done, like a lot of the SCLEOs groups that Anat described have done, to take people out into the real world and put comments and flag issues directly into the data. And also, interestingly, construction crews can do that when they're doing project closeout. So we need a really simple way to be able to let people know, let leaders also know in our legislature that this is an enormous achievement. It's a really rich set of resources that everybody in Washington now has available to them, and we need to figure out ways to make it easier for them to find it and easier for them to use. Next slide. So it's very simple schema, very simple format. That Washington WayKeeper is 3 things. It's an access map for travelers, walksheds for planners, and it's scout route for both community engagement and for field updates and construction crews. The two things on the outside are a mobile app, and walksheds is a desktop app, and everything is supported by OS Connect or the WayKeeper data platform. And all of these things are creating a conversation between people and their jurisdictions. Next slide. About what the real world experience of walking and rolling is. So this is, that part of the recipe of demanding your rights, of fighting for justice. Number one, number three. So the conversation is that residents can view the data and flag the issues and suggest edits and say, hey, it says that there's a curb ramp here, but there isn't. Advocates can mount campaigns, whether it's a school-based campaign or whether, Taryn, I see, is on the call, and campaign to evaluate bus stops that a transit agency has in a very structured and consistent way. And then the data that is there can be ground truth and validated. Next slide. So what's coming next? So that, promise that WayKeeper makes, that everybody has access map, every single jurisdiction has updated data sets, and everyone has the tools to make edits from the field, that is available now, and we're here in the launch WayKeeper part of this phase. At the same time, what we need to do in the light blue is start to make the case for continued support. And Anat has mentioned this earlier, but without the data being refreshed, next slide. So without continued support, we have a static map. And the static map increasingly loses its value over time as changes happen. But with continued support, those three things that we've said at the beginning that every Washingtonian gets from WayKeeper continue to be provided, right? So what are the elements of that, right? We have the local updates that continue to happen. The community campaigns continue to be surfaced in that community conversation flow that we talked about, and the agencies can reuse the updated data. So we would love to have your response to this idea of a one-stop shop for this stuff. And what if our shop had this sign outside that said WayKeeper? Does that resonate with you? We haven't done any design. You're the very first people that are hearing about this. And what would be a non-husky color set that we could use that could work on both sides of the mountains? We just want to sort of get a sense from you all. I mean, honestly, I have to say also, as a sort of new user to all of these things, the amount of tools in your everyday life that you're logging into, that you're switching from one to the other, and if it's not something that you're doing every day, it's an enormous sort of hill to climb to pick up where you left off with an application that you don't use every day. And so those are the kinds of things that are high on my mind in terms of how do you make this easier to explain, easier to use, easier to adopt, easier for the legislature to understand the value that these things bring so that they continue to fund. All right, so I'm going to stop talking, and we can go to the next slide and open it up to conversation.
I want to speak one of the problem when I try to use this data. I trying to get the sidewalk with information, and it's my first time to use the data. So actually, it took me like an hour to identify where those data, and also because our transit agency kind of like cover multiple city and jurisdictions. So um, I need to like download each city's map and data and plot it and get information. It's quite time consuming. So I really excited about what you're talking about here about this like one platform so that can easier for agency to use and also save time to like looking for data location and how to navigating the website as well.
Muted, Paulo.
Thank you. That's really useful feedback. And that's exactly the kind of thing we need to hear is what in the workflow, where are the places where people are getting lost, or where is it, exactly what you're describing we've heard before. It's like, well, I span multiple jurisdictions and I need to stitch this together, so I have to download separate things. Brian's asking, what does WayKeeper mean? What is it supposed to mean? I think WayKeeper has the idea that we were toying with is that it works both for travelers and also for people that are maintaining the network. And so it's, Kunal, for example, was explaining to me when we were working together that sometimes blind or low vision people are tend to list, where you're drifting a little bit, and being able to keep in the way that you're going is really important. And then the idea of stewardship, of maintaining this asset. Thomas?
Yeah, I'm broadly supportive of this in the context of telling a coherent story to potential funding entities such as the state legislature. I'm not quite clear on the value of this within the context of supporting usability of these tools and platforms around the state. From my perspective, one, I think that the focus needs to continue to be on thinking through, training on, standardizing, adapting tools for the practical workflows that different users around the state who are going to be maintaining this data will be using. Exactly to Huijin's point, like those processes of how to use are really the barriers, not so much the name or colors. And I say that as a person living in Portland who has no dedication to purple or any other Western Washington affiliated color. And I also I think we need to keep an eye on yes, there's a suite of tools here, and yes, it's important that this project support a suite of tools that enables different people in different technical contexts to engage fully with this ecosystem, even if they don't bring their own tool set. But it is also true that many of the users of this data are going to engage with this data through other applications, through ArcGIS Pro, through potentially OpenStreetMap, through things that are not within the WayKeeper ecosystem. And so we need to be careful about adding another name for folk to remember or keep track of that isn't, practically speaking, important to their daily workflows. That's kind of where I'm coming from at first glance.
Barb and Anna, and then Joanne.
Oh, I was gonna say other hands were up before mine, so I don't know. I guess they don't number them in Zoom. I think Joanne's hand was up and then Anna and then me.
It's not a big deal. Go ahead.
Um, I appreciate the let's not make it all purple, go Cougs. Paulo knows I said something about that after watching a bunch of purple and gold maps, and it is real in Eastern Washington. So yeah, a neutral palette, catchy neutral palette would matter for statewide adoption. It just would. People are parochial. We have our clans. I really like the name. I think, and I saw that like I had to participate in the chat because I think of a haymaker as a punch. So a waymaker being analogous to a punch doesn't sound there's an organization called Puget Sound Keeper, the beekeepers. The idea of tending something you care about, I think, has appeal. And I do get the idea of like one URL as sort of the front door to multiple purposes. So I guess on the branding side, it is less of a mouthful than the various ways I've been describing this to people in all of the links I've been copying and pasting. I want to back up to when you described it, Paulo, and you said this is I don't know how to preface this. When you say this is a way for individuals to know that their rights are being violated and rise up and demand change, that is not a selling point for a city to participate. It really, really isn't. Oh, thank you, Brett. Waymaker. Okay. I didn't understand why a haymaker had something to do with the highways. So there is a really nuanced need of talking, how you talk about this. If you talk about it as we are going to be partners together in identifying and prioritizing really critical gaps, because I live here and I do have the right to go places, that is softer than rise up, take the streets. It really is. And you will need that to get cities to participate, because otherwise they're going to feel like they're setting themselves up for a lawsuit and that they might deserve, but paying for lawyers doesn't pay for sidewalks. So I think the description in a way that kind of is cognizant of the concerns of all the potential partners would be really important to no matter what you call it, that's going to be important going forward. That's what I've got. First blush.
Thank you, Barb. Joanne?
Hi. I'm from the opposite coast, as far away from Washington State as you can get. I'm in South Florida, so I don't know the nuances of the different colors. But I am an orientation and mobility specialist. I would suggest, high contrast neutral colors. So those individuals with low vision would be able to see it effectively. I couldn't tell you the colors that would be most appropriate because I don't know the history. But you might want to go with like a yellow and a black, something that contrasts well together that doesn't upset the apple cart, so to speak. I do like the name now that I am seeing it correctly. I heard it differently too. But agree that if you're going to partner with cities, counties, states, whoever the other entities are, a partnership, a collaboration, neutral, friendly terminology needs to be used because they get sued very frequently without any incentive. And if you present it as if you don't do anything or else, that might be a disincentive.
Yeah.
Not to say that lawsuits sometimes aren't necessary, but the softer presentation is more effective if you want to develop a partnership.
Thank you, Joanne. Anna?
All right. Hey everyone. Anna Zevarts here. I having done some of these sort of events with community and with elected leaders and with agency folks, I think some of the struggle was just that there were so many ways to interact with this data and so many different interfaces. And, even sort of putting them under a similar brand name, I think there's still going to be a lot of confusion. I question, I guess, in my experience with working with people with disabilities, trying to use access maps as a way to interact with this data and use it for route finding or route following, it was really challenging in every context we tried it in. And so personally, I'm most excited about this data existing in a way that can be used and updated by agencies, and then ultimately perhaps accessed by the public. But I'm not sure right now that access map is working well enough for people to use it, and also just because it is like one more app that you have to learn how to navigate with a screen reader perhaps, or have on your phone. It's not an app, it's online. Like just the sort of the barriers to that made me question, maybe it makes sense to focus more on the places where agencies can update this data. Maybe folks can contribute updates, but is the routing piece ready yet to be rolled out in a way where it's going to be a good experience for the user? I think we struggled a little bit with that, at least in like sort of the short time that these trainings were happening in. And I think, perhaps as like, I'm not sure people are going to have the patience to get it to work for them yet.
Thanks, Anna. That's really helpful. Patricia?
Hi. Hey, my name's Patricia Neighbor, and I've worked for local government and state government, done some consulting as well. I think with trying to engage city governments, it would. So I agree with what Barb Chamberlain said, but then to add about how to engage with local governments, I think making it appealing to them. I think it would be useful, like with many other groups, to have a meeting and to make it an appealing meeting for them, to ask them what their needs are. And I think that a few things have been touched on already, but I agree with I think they will know how their data frameworks are set up, or somebody at the city, if there were a city representative attending the meeting, they would know who to ask. I think if you have a meeting, the city might designate a staff person, and that person can advocate internally. But you could figure out how they have data set up. Also, I think legal issues would be one of the things that come to mind for the cities, especially when they're not doing a very good job serving people who are disabled, and that's a lot of communities. And I think they know that, and it's how they, and then their work is overflowing already. So how did they get to that? I think you can also ask who the communities of people who are disabled are that they're already communicating with. And that could help prompt them if they aren't doing that yet. And then they're busy too. And then so I think there's things to do with city outreach, and then separately the naming. I think getting a name that's really compelling, that's quickly understood, could be good. I mean, there's folks out there who do marketing and branding for their whole profession, and so they know more about like what's really compelling and understandable to people. So I think that could, I don't know what your resources are, but that could be useful. Yeah, that's all I have right now.
Thanks, Patricia. Anat, can you take down the screen share so we can see more people? In the meantime, Matthew.
Hey, Pablo. Thanks for this. Thanks for this forum. Matthew Widener, King County Metro. I agree with a lot of what people are saying. I like the idea of kind of presenting this as a more neutral front, but with a suite of tools that can be leveraged. The way that I see this is, I really hear what Thomas is saying about, those practitioners who are working in the cities and working in those locations. They really need some kind of guidance on how to leverage this, what is a generational leap in data and how we relate to that data. So, I see kind of a two-pronged attack of, giving those practitioners the technical knowledge and building up that toolkit so they can interface with this new way of working, as well as, the public, engaging the public and helping them drive this. And I just want to kind of suggest that maybe, liaising with MPOs might be a good way to try to facilitate greater acceptance of this. Because if you look at like the Puget Sound Regional Council, and their planning documents around sidewalks, like it's very rudimentary. And so, maybe partnering with the planning school to do an analysis of, what do planning documents for these MPOs say about sidewalks today, and what could a model planning document look like, for the next planning cycle. Oh, and here's how you get that data. Like, here's how you leverage this data source to make it happen. That might be a great collaboration that could give some students, some really great experience, and you'd be training the next generation of practitioners to utilize this data set.
That's really cool. Thanks, Matthew. Doreen?
There we go. Let's see, couple pieces of feedback. I was not completely hearing all the pieces, so I'm just going to bounce off. As far as the visual presentation, an option where even if you do colors, people can set it to high contrast or to yellow on blue, because there's some combinations that work for specific disabilities, visual conditions, and they're kind of well understood. I share the comment somebody said about there's a kind of investment, a learning curve, even for somebody like, I love data, but you give me something and I have to figure out the way around it, and then I have to work with other people in the same category, and so. And then there's the frustration of, oh, you've gotten to the point where you see the data and then you realize the data I want is not there. And so I think that's going to be iterative. As far as ways to dialogue with cities, sometimes cities know they have problem areas. And if you say, okay, let's pick a problem area and then have this kind of community engagement or this kind of people, contributing their experience for a while, so that's also iterative. Because I agree, it's really exciting to have the data and to have all this thinking about how to make it reusable and to use it at scale. But it's also, to me, it's kind of tempting to want everything all at once. And it's great what's here, but I don't think we're going to get all at once.
Doreen, you cut out at the last minute. Can you say it's great what's here, ...
Oh.
Can you rewind to that point?
Oh, I just said it's great what's here, and it's easy to want all at once everything, and we're not going to get all at once everything. So I don't know what I said before, but that's pretty much my thought.
Thanks, Doreen. Gina?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for this really helpful presentation and understand what's happening. This is my first time attending, so I do have some kind of more basic questions about the data that kind of spans, Paulo, both your presentation and Anat's. Because this data is so important to have from a planning perspective, active transportation planner, and I think all the components are there in terms of the public engagement and jurisdictional engagement. With the power of the University of Washington's participation, has a way of collecting data in a kind of automated way been explored at all? We're all carrying these devices in our pockets, and I would imagine there's lots of data there that could be useful. Has that been explored at all in this process?
Hi, I'll jump in to answer that question. So we have an automated computer vision app that will be incorporated into a Vive Scout route to basically open up your camera with LiDAR. So if you have a phone that's enabled with LiDAR, and so it would be able to identify those very detailed surface disruption information in an automated fashion. The majority of the automation that tends to work is, the whole data set was collected in an automated fashion from aerial imagery, but that requires a re-up of the aerial imagery for the state, which is presently not available. But there are folks in Washington State that are working on getting access to the 2025 flight imagery. So I don't know if that fully answers your question. We actually started out from a mobile application and as well as like a 4D camera that allows you to, cart around devices on location. The challenge there is that you still need humans to manually do that kind of automated collection. So it doesn't avoid the main barrier, which is that this process is hugely laborious and inefficient if not done through a single, aerial collection or satellite imagery collection.
Yeah, thank you. That explains it. I just think about, the use of Google Maps and how there's so much information there and what can be automated and pulled. So that certainly, answers the question, but it just seems like
so one avenue that we had explored is UW has Google-like cars that allow for the collection, but that too requires driving. So we can drive the whole state, but we're not allowed to use Google imagery. Google imagery's licensing does not allow for the open shared public display or presentation of any data derived by eye or automation to the public. And so by decree, the Proviso requires that we're able to open and share this data, and therefore we are unable to use that data collection that is out there.
Thank you for explaining that. So another place to rise up, maybe.
I've been making those calls for the last 10 years. I don't think it's going anywhere, honestly.
Well, thank you for explaining that, and I appreciate it.
Sure.
Yeah, and they like their money over there at Google. Anybody else? Melissa had a really good comment, I think. Would you like to read your comment, Melissa, or do you want me to read it in the chat?
So I had a couple comments. So I'm Melissa Anderson. I'm a geometric design engineer at the Federal Highway Administration, but I've worked in civil rights and pedestrian accessibility for many years. So I do want to say something that is not coming from Federal Highway. This is a personal professional expertise comment. Those of you who are afraid to collect this data and have ownership of where your problems are not doing yourselves a favor. Knowing where the barriers to accessibility are is legally required in the ADA. Also in Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, and if you're talking transit, which I noticed when the transit companies mentioned that, these laws are so old that if you end up in court, you could easily be called on the carpet for where's your data, where's your plan. So having that data and having a plan is fundamental to serving your population and providing an accessible program. Don't be afraid of having the data, but have a plan to remove barriers and do it. Work on your plan. And when you prioritize even data collection, it's a big task, but what are your priority areas? Are they your schools, your parks, your public buildings, your downtown area? start there or wherever you choose. And the public should really be involved in deciding where the community or the transit user priorities are. And it's important that people with disabilities participate in the conversation. So I know that the fear of owning data that shows where you have problems it's not just in Washington. It's in a lot of places across the country, but it's no defense. It's like sticking your head in the sand. So just collect it and then have a plan. You've got a whole system to take care of. You can't fix everything at once, but there's no excuse. So I'll get off my soapbox and I'm going to go because I'm long past due. Not a federal highway lecture. That is a Melissa lecture.
What an amazing place to end on, maybe. Any last thoughts on that?
No, we will continue the conversation. We will maybe put some of these into the FAQ as well. Some of the questions that came up are certainly needed for people to continue and access the information. And if you would like to join us, there is a weekly office hour on Tuesday mornings that allows us to continue these and proceed with some of the pilots. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, everybody.
Thank you for sharing all this great information.
Melissa, keep coming to these things.
You'll get tired of hearing from me. And right now, I'm the only person in this entire building that's not probably cleaning bathrooms. But if my coworkers overheard me, I might get in trouble.
No, that was really helpful to hear, and said so directly. What do they say? Ignorance of the law is no. How does that?
It's no excuse.
Is no excuse.
Yeah.
And if you stand up in front of a judge and say, "Well, I didn't know that bus stop or that sidewalk was not accessible," what is your real excuse? I mean, you own that program. So anyway, I could go off on that soapbox forever. I'll be quiet. Everybody have a good evening. Have a good weekend.
Good
night.
Thank you.
See you again.
All right. See you in a Bye.
Thanks.
Well,
Yeah. Thank you, Kunal.
thank you, Kunal.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that was really, really helpful. You happy with how that went or not?
Overall, yeah. I do want to hear from Ashley if she's still around.
Yeah, it seems like Ashley's still here.
Yeah. I think he's probably offline somehow. That's okay. I'll ping you, Ashley. And thanks, Joanne, for your comments. We will see you at the end of the month. All right, we've got work to do.
Okay.